Chapter 8 of the Narrative of Sojourner Truth. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Mark Kokonos. The Narrative of Sojourner Truth by Olive Gilbert and Sojourner Truth. Chapter 8. Death of Bomefree. A rude cabin in a lone wood, far from any neighbors, was granted to our freed friends, as the only assistance they were now to expect. Bomefree from this time found his poor needs hardly supplied, as his new providers were scarce able to administer to their own wants. However, the time drew near when things were to be decidedly worse rather than better, for they had not been together long before Betty died, and shortly after Caesar followed her to that bourne from whence no traveller returns, leaving poor James again desolate and more helpless than ever before, as this time there was no kind family in the house, and the Ardinburghs no longer invited him to their homes. Yet, lone, blind, and helpless as he was, James for a time lived on. One day an aged colored woman named Sowen called at his shanty, and James besought her in the most moving manner, even with tears, to tarry a while and wash and mend him up, so that he might once more be decent and comfortable, for he was suffering dreadfully with the filth and vermin that had collected upon him. Sowen was herself an emancipated slave, old and weak, with no one to care for her, and she lacked the courage to undertake a job of such seeming magnitude, fearing she might herself get sick, and perish there without assistance. And with great reluctance, and a heart swelling with pity, as she afterwards declared, she felt obliged to leave him in his wretchedness and filth. And shortly after her visit, this faithful slave, this deserted wreck of humanity, was found on his miserable pallet, frozen and stiff in death. The kind angel had come at last and relieved him of the many miseries that his fellow man had heaped upon him. Yes, he had died chilled and starved, with none to speak a kindly word or do a kindly deed for him in that last dread hour of need. The news of his death reached the ears of John Ardinburgh, a grandson of the old colonel, and he declared that Bomefree, who had ever been a kind and faithful slave, should now have a good funeral. And now, gentle reader, what think you constituted a good funeral? Answer: some black paint for the coffin, and a jug of ardent spirits. What a compensation for a life of toil, of patient submission to repeated robberies of the most aggravated kind, and also far more than murderous neglect. Mankind often vainly attempts to atone for unkindness or cruelty to the living by honoring the same after death. But John Ardinburgh undoubtedly meant his pot of paint and jug of whiskey should act as an opiate on his slaves, rather than on his own seared conscience. End of Chapter 8.